Hello, how are you? Welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. I'm Shamele Jordon. You know what I get tired of and what really drove me crazy when I first started doing genealogy? It was the doom and gloom about burnt out courthouses. Oh, I can't find anything because all my records is burnt out. No, all your records. They had one fire. They might have had two. Some people had some really serious devastation as far as burnt out courthouses and things like that. Today's show is all about and for those who want to press forward. We have two shows with two different topics that really can help you to have clues that you might not have thought about with the records that you already have and how to get to other records. First one we have is, I love this title, Not Just the Main Name. It's kind of scary because it's hard enough keeping track of your own names. But I'm curious to figure out how Michael and Jim are telling you to go beyond the main name, how that's going to help you out. But they're always so good. They always come up with ways that I never even thought that it's going to help you out. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And then remember, I was just talking about those burnt out courthouses. Well, that's a case of when records are scarce. And our special guest today, Chris Staats, is going to do a quick start on what to do when records are scarce. And I am so certain that even those of you with those burnt down counties are going to get something out of this. So let me bring on my buddies, my number one and my number two. They're both number ones. Number 1.1 and 1.1. First up, columnist and editor. Where are you at? Jim Beidler. And also, genealogy tip of the day. I mean, he is a serious, like blogger just seems so, well, author, definitely. Do you have the book? I'm not telling you to go get the book, but it might be something you might want to look at. Michael, John, Neill, how are you?
I am good. I'm not sure I can do 1.1, but we'll try. Something like that. I had to be real careful what fingers were going up when I did that. So I wanted to err on the side of caution so we didn't send the wrong message this evening.
And that was a very nice recovery by you, Shamel, when you were like number one and number two. And I could just see those wheels turning. Oh, no, they're going to be razzing me on who's number one and who's number two. Very nice recovery.
Thank you. Thank you. I have learned from the best. So tell me about this quick start that you guys are talking about today. Who, where is it? Not not just the main name. What is that all about?
Well, this kind of falls into the category of, well, it's kind of a saying I use in lectures is how what are we doing as genealogists a lot of the time? We're looking for needles in haystacks, and we're either trying to make the haystack smaller or the needles stick out bigger. One of those two things to be able to find our ancestors. But there are times when, oxymoronically, you've got to expand the haystack, make it bigger to make sure that records of your ancestor are in there, or that you're getting the full picture of the fan club, the friends, associates, and neighbors from the records that you're looking at.
Do you concur with whatever
I,
he just said?
well, I was going to say, unless your ancestors were Hoovers, they didn't live in a vacuum. And so you've got to research when you're stuck. When you're stuck, you want to look at the people they interacted with, and census records aren't always the best way to see who they really interacted with, because sometimes the people you interact with are not necessarily your next door neighbors, and we're wanting clues. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight, are looking at those other names and trying to maximize clues they may give us about our own direct line ancestors.
All right. So we got more work than just, oh my goodness, not just the main name. So let's get on with step one, which is to choose a document. So please tell me we're not going to start with like census records, right? Because that's a lot of people to look up. Like, what kind of documents are we talking about here?
I
We're
would
talking about
say,
go ahead.
well, I think Jim was going to say probate.
Yes.
Probate documents. I would say, court documents, any record that could indicate individuals with whom your ancestor really interacted financially, legally, biologically, and court, probate. There's other records too. Pension records come to mind, but those are some of the big ones that really are more likely to, in church records, catch those people that your ancestor interacted with whom he or she had a significant enough relationship. There might be some connection that we could milk for further clues.
I like that. We're going to milk them for clues. All right. So choose a document. Probate records are on the top of the list of these types of documents. So step two is to read and extract personal names. So give us a record example and what,
I would say probably one of the good examples would be if somebody's posting an executor's bond or an administrator's bond, who are the bondsmen? Pull those names because there's a potential relationship there with those individuals. I would suggest, unless you're really stuck, the name of the clerk. I don't always pull the name of the clerk because you can. I just don't, because they're there in that official job capacity. I may try to confirm it's the clerk and then leave it at that, because the clerk is on everybody's record. It's not, he needs to be there to make it legal. But how helpful? I know sometimes it is helpful. I can see Jim's 2 gears turning there about the clerk. But I don't always get too concerned about the clerk, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I don't ordinarily either. Plus, the man who's stated as the clerk may be the one who holds the office, and that may not be the actual scrivener of these documents written into the will books, written into the deed books. But we should take notice of it, because I know I've seen deeds where they attempt, of Germans, where they attempt to show the signature in German script. In other words, not his original signature, but they're trying to write it in this recopied deed book. And that's a way, if it's a name that's equivocal as far as ethnicity, that's a way that you'll prove, they actually are German. So.
And it depends on the record. You definitely want to capture like the official, because you never know what that could turn up as well.
And that the thing, if it's a justice of the peace or a township clerk or something like that, that might help you narrow down the geography in some cases too. It depends on how confused you are and what you don't know. But in some cases, a justice of the peace maybe he had a township or a specific part of the county in which he could operate, and that might help you narrow down where your person lived within the county if you don't have a clue as to where that was.
Geography. I love that. You guys always come up with something. So guess what I forgot to do? And our true blue people have reminded me by saying, hey, Shamele, it's Paula Moen from West Deptford. Hello, Paula. Hello, Judy from Chicagoland. Hello, C. Davis from Detroit. Fred Hart Williams. I love y'all folks at the Fred Hart Williams. Hello, Wayne from down the road. Grace Ann, how are you? Camden County Historical Society, Salem County. We also have Kay Wells. Denise Payne, how are you from the Netherlands? Hey, Walt, it's our former special guest, Walt Lafty. Walt is so funny. Get your own account, Walt. Hey, Jenny. Yes, civil court cases are great documents to know who everyone is. There's Walt. I see you, Walt. Hello, Valerie Ann. Thank you, everyone. And if you are watching, whether it's live or in replay, let us know where you are. We love to know where you are. Um, all right. So we have chosen a document. Now we are reading the document and we're extracting all of the personal names. Sometimes you get the clerk. Oh my goodness, we have GSP from like back in the day. Anita Corluzzi. Hello, girl. What is going on? I thought I was crazy about genealogy. I don't think I've met anybody crazier than this woman, and I'm serious. She makes me nervous. She's so crazy about genealogy. All right, so let's move on to step 3. You guys are going to get me on these time. Determine the relationship with the main name. So you've pulled out all these names, and so now what are you doing?
Oh, you're going to research those names. Oh, depending on how many names the document has, you maybe can only go so far with them, but at least try to match them up with a census or a tax list or some sort of residential type of record to get a feel from for how far out this document was drawing people.
The other thing I would, when you're looking at these other names that are in the document besides your real person of interest, note in what capacity they appeared on that were they a witness, were they a bondsman, were they buying something at a sale, or what have you. That's just something, so you track that so you've got that later. And then, like Jim said, research them and a little bit and see if it looks like there's potential there to research them more, because you can't research all of, if you're looking at people that bought property at an auction, there may be a lot of them.
Lots.
And you maybe not be able to research all of them in a great deal of depth, but do a quick search to see if they're from the same place your person probably was from, or there's some hint of a connection.
Yeah, I know in those in the Civil War pensions, it's like you can put the whole neighborhood together. Like when they come, so the guy comes and asks a lot of people in the neighborhood, you can basically put the whole neighborhood together and know what they think about each other. So yeah, it can be a lot of fun determining the relationship. So that's step 3. You guys want to show the documents at the end?
If it's not too much trouble to show the one I sent over,
sure.
Why don't we go to that? I'll say a couple of things about it.
Sure. That's the 1811 inventory.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
There you go.
And this is just one of many pages of the inventory of a guy named John Beidler, not my ancestor. He's like a 5th grade uncle or something to me. And the thing that I found striking here, that was worth noting, is that in many inventories, you won't find any personal names. You're gonna find the list of objects, their anvil, their horses, their books, things like that. But this particular individual, he was a miller, a pretty well-off miller, and he was essentially the bank for the neighborhood, because millers more than many other occupations of the day had access to cash. And so his inventory goes on for pages and pages with lists of debtors who owed him interest on bonds, the actual bond holders that were assets of the estate, all sorts of things. And this is the type of list, like Michael says, you wouldn't be able to do every name necessarily, but it's worth reading through to get a better idea of the individual and his place, his context in his life.
This might be one too where you could look, and like Jim said, you can't research all of them. Perhaps there's too many, but if there are 2 or 3 people whose the amount that they owe stands out as being significantly more than the others, that might make you wonder if there was a closer, not necessarily had to be, but a closer relationship. Because a lot of them might be small amounts. They couldn't pay their bill when it came due, and they signed a bond for that. But if there's one that's like 4 or 5 times as much as the others, there might have been a better connection there with that person, perhaps.
And maybe just a business connection.
Right, exactly.
But I mean that, we always instinctively go to blood relationships. But the business things like business relationships will add context to someone's biography and life too.
Well, and the other thing you want to remember is we all may have relatives to whom we would not lend money, if you catch my drift. And our ancestors might have been no different. They might have been no different at all. There might have been neighbors they trusted to pay it back, but they might have had a whole bunch of siblings or whatever. They wouldn't want money to, so you want to keep that in mind. But I would, like I said, I would look at any that are significantly higher just to see, were they a supplier for him? Did they help him build something? Whatever. There might be a relationship there.
So Jim, tell me about these. Is this money? Where is it at? Is this like for these people over here, 17.6.3.5?
Yeah, well, this is in the old Pennsylvania pounds, shillings and pence, which was used in Berks County, Pennsylvania, into the 1820s and 30s as an alternate record monetary units. And so these relatively small amounts are some of them are just interest, like the ones you see there for John Griffith and John Goodman above him, where it's just a pound or two. Now the one above him, this Benjamin Davis, and it says on book, that's 17 pounds. That one is probably about bond, either a bond that he took out, or like Michael says, he helped them in construction, something like that. They're putting it in his book to so that a reckoning could be made.
This is a debit against his daughter. Of the
I didn't even see that one. Yeah,
195. She's like, look, you gotta pay me back. We are subtracting that off of the total.
Taking it off the top.
You would have gotten something if you didn't take all that money for me paying for all your kids to go to college.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so that's step 3. You're going to try to determine the relationships. And I really like step 4, even though it's too long. Locate other documents with the main and the personal name. So why do you want to do that?
Well, to see if they're interacting with that same person in other situations. Is it over time? Kind of maybe to gauge the length of the relationship. Would be one thing, because the more frequent they're interacting with that person, then the more inclined I would be to research that person. We talked about kind of doing a superficial search initially, but if I see Tom and William interacting quite a bit in documents, I may need to do more than a superficial search on William. There may be a strong, and it could be just like Jim said, it could be a financial relationship where there's no biological or marital relationship there, but it's still something I might want to research further if they're interacting quite a bit over time.
Right. Go ahead. So you want to see if you can find them together in more documents, because that could point to like son-in-law and like more closer relationships. That also helps. Oh my gosh, it helps with distinguishing same name people from others, because they each had their own kind of cluster, their own gang, I guess you'd say, that they hung around with. So all right, you guys teach me so much. So step 5 is to then document findings and repeat what you did. So choose another document and continue doing this. Any final tips on this really cool idea of going beyond
Well,
just the main name?
let's look at the other examples, and we'll probably have a few comments for the good of the order.
Who is this unknown bondsman? It sounds like a movie.
Well, I didn't catch that you had the wrong title there. This was an unknown. This was a not a bondsman, but a sponsor on a baptism.
Oh, okay.
The names that are there, but I didn't. We oftentimes think about sponsors or relatives. I do know in this case the sponsors were not. This is an uncle of so many greats in front of him. The sponsors are not biologically related to him. The family's pretty well documented. AIM and I can't quite make out. I think it's Henercha. They are not related to Foki and Anna, the parents of the child. They're well documented.
Okay.
So it kind of goes. You want to research them because AIM was a neighbor. He also appeared on a homestead application for the father of this child and a couple other documents, but there was no biological relationship. They were just neighbors who trusted each other. They were actually from the same ethnic region of Germany. That was their connection. There was not a biological connection. So we don't want to assume, there has to be a blood relationship there somewhere. That's not always the case. Not always.
All right. I love that.
And what ethnic area was that, Michael?
It would be Ostfriesian, like most of my, not all my German examples, but a fair portion of them are.
Go Ostfriesland.
And after we did the Ostfriesian, this is I didn't realize you got the titles off. This is the bondsman on this is an 1856 guardianship bond. This woman is a German immigrant. She was not Ostfriesian. But she and this gentleman he is her bondsman. She's being the administrator and guardian for her children after her husband died. This is a gentleman he appears on a couple other documents with Barbara. He is someone I should research a little further to see, is he about her age? He did not marry her. They never did. He's not one of her husbands. She had a few, but he was not one of them. Where was he? Where was he from? Did she know him before she came to the U.S.? I do know Barbara was in Cincinnati for about 2 or 3 years, maybe longer, before they came out to Illinois, where this document was created. Did she and her deceased husband meet him in Cincinnati? Did he live there for a time? And if he did, then I want to research him even further, because maybe there's a clue. Because maybe he obviously died after her husband, when better records were kept. And maybe if I can find out where Conrad is from or some more details about him, I'll learn a little more about Barbara's first husband, the ancestor. Because Barbara's first husband, the Peter there, you can see his name after that little blob, he died in 1855, when in Illinois, there are no good records about where they're from, date of birth, any of that information. And so maybe this bondsman here, Conrad, could give me some.
Uh-oh.
Did we lose Michael?
I know he's kind of frozen up. Well, and I wanted him to stop talking anyway, because I had something to add to this. Because I have a case in my personal genealogy where I wondered why a guardian was chosen who, and what wasn't too far away in terms of mileage, but they were on either side of a mountain. And I speculated maybe that guardian I knew the village, or was able to find out the village of origin in Germany. And so I just took that as a clue to try to find my ancestor, and hot diggity dog, there he was in the same place. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What was the document?
It was also a guardianship. Yeah. He was Michael Christmann was named guardian for Johannes Denius's children, and it's like they were several neighborhoods apart, and this must have been the reason that they were appointed in the old country.
Wow, that was a huge cute clue. What do we have here? Did I get this one wrong too?
No, you did not. They've been named. We mentioned pension records. I think you mentioned Civil War
Yes,
pensions
I love those
earlier.
Civil War pensions.
This is as you mentioned, you can get the whole neighborhood, and in some of these pensions, particularly if they had to have a lot of paperwork, there can be a tremendous number of names, sometimes almost more than a person cares to research or has time to research. One of the things you want to look at, though, and try to pick out which ones are more important, perhaps, are the amount of time they had known the person. So this here, I think somewhere it says we've known him for the last 14 years. So whenever I see how long they had known that the soldier or the widow, if it's the widow's application, I backtrack to where were they living that many years ago. Was it still in Iowa, or was it back in Indiana or Pennsylvania or what have you? The longer they had known them, the more likely I am to research them, because the more likely they are to be a relative. No guarantee, but the more likely they are to be related, and maybe there'll be some geographic clues there when I research them further back, time-wise. This is just an 1818 court affidavit. I threw this in here because I wanted something a little bit earlier, but this is mentioning the affidavit of Edward Tinsley. This is, I think, a tobacco case, if memory serves. No, a case over a slave. And it's just those other individuals, particularly in this time period in Virginia, we don't have a lot of good records. It isn't like New England, where we've got a lot of vital records and things of that type. So court records, where we get as many associates as possible, become even more important because there can be clues as to neighbors. It mentions John Sled. It mentions Barkdale Sled. I'm not sure if in this document, but I know in one of the other documents in this court case, it does indicate the relationship between that John and that Barksdale. But you've got to read through all of that, because there's just a couple places where, poof, it says brother. And that's, if you don't read all of it, you don't see that. But the nice thing about using digital images of these things, you can, if you want, you can underline the names, and that makes it easier for them to stand out later, because they can be hard to see buried in the text, especially if the script is hard to read.
Yes, I love that. I love that. It's so funny when it's just this one son. It's just like, oh my God, we finally got something. No, I love that. So not just the main name, guys. Let's go through these steps. Fantastic quick start. Thank you. So first you want to choose a document. Probate documents are at the top of the list. Step 2, you want to read and extract the personal names from the document. Step 3 is then you want to determine the relationship with that main name. Step 4 is to then locate other documents with the main and the personal name. And step 5 is to document your findings and repeat, because guess what? There's more than just the main name and the personal name that you just looked up. So I love that. Wash, rinse, and repeat. Thank you so much, guys. I adored that. And I'm sure everyone will find it useful. I will see you guys in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, let's get ready for our special guest. I love interesting names with double letters where you don't know how to pronounce it. He corrected me though. Let's get started. Let me do this really quick. Chris out and about. All right. Hello and welcome back to, you gonna let me see myself? Hi. To our second quick start. Today, I'm going to bring out our special guest for this episode on what to do when records are scarce. So let me bring out our special guest, Chris Staats, and that States, right?
Well, is that the way I pronounce it? Yes. Is that right? No. I believe, as far as I've been able to trace, from my second great grandfather forward, we're the only branch of this family that pronounces it that way.
Oh, how does everyone else pronounce it?
Usually Stats, or the more proper Dutch pronunciation of Staats. But
Staats. That's how you should be saying it. Staats.
it sounds cooler, doesn't it?
Staats. No, that makes me like that. Like that feels like something cold in my hands with some foam up top.
But there aren't many of us left that pronounce it States. So if I don't know you and you pronounce it States, I'm a little suspicious. Like, how do you know me?
So speaking of knowing you, I would love to ask you the question that we ask all of our special guests. How did you get started? It's your 1-minute genealogy story. How did you get started, and when did you know you were hooked?
Oh, 1 minute's tough for me, but I'll try and get it in. So short answer, how did I start? It's probably with my grandparents, both my grandmothers. I had some information from my maternal grandmother. And then my grandmother on my paternal side, my dad's mom, on her last visit, we kind of interviewed her and wrote down, what she could remember about her family history. I'd always been kind of interested. And that sat in the drawer for a while. And eventually I pulled it out and started trying to make sense out of the names that I was finding in there. So that was the start. But I was probably hooked before this, but I was definitely hooked. I've been researching for a while. The big mystery that I had to solve was my great-great-grandfather, Alexander States, was born illegitimately, which we all knew, but nobody knew who the father was. Excuse me. So that was our first mystery I had to solve. And I made several trips to the Harrison County Courthouse here in Ohio with not any success. And I never worked with common pleas records. I didn't know much about them. So in desperation, I walked into the clerk's office and said, "Excuse me, I'm looking for common pleas records from 1838. And she said, "Well, just a second." So she spun around. She said, "Wait, did you say 1838? I said, "Yes." So there was some confusion about what they still had and what was being rebound. And finally, she took me to this closet. She opened it. She said, "All the old stuff's in here. Look at whatever you want, move whatever you need." And the very first book I picked up was an index to a common pleas docket. And in the index, there it was. It was a complaint of Edith States, State of Ohio versus Jesse B. Pickering, bastardy. And I came running out of that room with that book back into the clerk's office. I said, "I found it! I found it! I found it!" She's like, "I don't know what you found, but just could you put that back in the room, please?"
Get all that dust away
genealogists
from
are a little
me.
nuts. But for definitely, that's still in my top 3 genealogical moments. Was just
Oh, it's now one of my top 5. I love that. I
just
love
the
when they
serendipity of
say,
even just the first book. It was like completely unbelievable. So
I
I was
been
in for
there.
sure after that.
I have been there where they say you can go in there, but you're probably not going to find anything, and you find like the greatest thing ever.
Oh, yeah.
So genealogy life is a good life when that happens.
It's good. It's good when they trust you enough to send you in there just to dig up whatever you want.
They don't care. It's not like they're doing you any kind. They don't care. Just get away from them. Like,
I've had some leaner overs who will stand over your shoulder the entire time you're there too.
If you promise not to talk to me, you can go in that room. That's the person I want to meet. All right, let's do your quick start, which I love. Because I get sick of hearing, "Oh, I don't have no records. I don't have no records." So you're going to talk to us about what to do when records are scarce, like fires, and it just seems like there's nothing out there, right?
Yep. So, I mean, I've kind of focused this around colonial Delaware because that's some of the most difficult research that I'd run into. But before I forget, which I probably will at some point, I kind of want to point out we're going through steps today is kind of how we organize it, but it's not like you're climbing the set of stairs and at 5 you put your arms up and you're finished. Typically what's going to happen is you'll go through steps maybe 3 and 4, and then you start back over again as you find new information.
No, it's
or you even get to step 5 where you start to write some stuff down and you're like, "Oh, I found some holes," and you have to start back again.
No, this is the magical staircase.
Oh, is the magical staircase?
Yes, you just have to believe. Don't let me get Diana Ross and the Wiz on here for you. All right. So let's go through these steps here. He's right. That's why Michael and Jim like to say wash, rinse, and repeat, because you do have to keep going through the steps. But thank you for bringing us back to reality.
Yep. So
step 1, you said for this is to survey sources before you search. What do you mean survey sources?
Yeah, so this is tough, and especially as technology has progressed and more records are available and indexed online that you can just hop into a search box and start searching. So even for me, especially if I just have a few minutes or something, it's really easy just to type a name into a box and see what comes up and look at the records that you find there. But when you get into some difficult research problems and there's limited records and it's not an area or time that you're necessarily familiar with, it really behooves you to sit down and do a complete survey of what kind of records are available that might be relevant to the particular research problem that you're trying to solve.
Where are some great places you like to... I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, typically I would start someplace like Family Search.
Yeah, that's my number one place to go because they make it so easy.
Yep, either the catalog or the wiki, depending on how built out the wiki might be for your area. And moving from there, start looking at things like state archives, state historical societies, local historical societies, and libraries. Just any place that may hold records of interest, whether they're offline or online. We'll talk about that in the next step. I think the side benefit of this, or maybe a big benefit of this, is that by doing that, you're really getting a better understanding of the time and area that you're researching. And when you do start to dive into the research, even if it is in a database that you're searching, you have some context to the records that you're looking at. Whereas if you just put a name in and something pops up, you don't necessarily understand how that fits into that overall research picture in that area.
Love that. Love that. Family Search is my jam when it comes to that. I'm in the Philly area. I should be saying that's my John. Sorry, guys. So step one is to survey the sources before you search. Step two is then to access what you can and plan for what you can't. It sounds cool, but what's it mean?
Yeah. Well, this actually was a riff on one of my old presentations called "Not Online is Not Out of Reach," and this is really an extension of step one. So as you're going through this, you're doing your survey. You're going to be identifying, of course, what records are online, what records are not online. And once you identify whatever records are available that may hold, potential clues, and you're looking for, you can't research every record that exists. So you kind of have to prioritize and identify, what are the most likely record groups. In our examples today, you can do a full survey of what's available, and basically you're going to come up with deeds, probate, taxes, court records, and a few scattered weird kind of records. None of which were online when I started, all of which are online now. I'll talk about that in a minute. But and once you've identified those, then start to prioritize your research plan. And you want to start with whatever collections are online and are available to you. The goal being to build as much as you can before you have to dig into those offline records, which is going to start costing you time and money and a few weekends of your life, probably, if you really get out there, which everyone should.
Yes, you got to get out there and call ahead. Oh my gosh, I went there on a Friday and it was like, oh no, we're off today. What? I'm off too. I thought you were going to be open.
Yeah. Well, I ask specific questions when you call ahead because I've gone to places where I asked if they were open and they were. So I went there and I was looking for they had their repository for some court records. So I said, well, I'm looking for whatever it was, probate records or whatever. They're like, oh, we don't have a key to that on Sundays. So
what?
I couldn't get what I needed.
It's only it's what? It's a Monday through Saturday key. It shuts
so be
off
specific.
on
I guess
whatever.
Their court person must be off on weekends.
All right, so
and I'll echo Jim's and Michael's comments. As you get into the online records that you're able to access, make sure you identify and make a list of collateral relatives, friends, associates, neighbors, and add those folks to your research plan. And we'll look at some examples, further examples of where that was super helpful in the problem I was solving in this particular case.
All right.
And the other thing, I'll move along because I know we're flying on.
No, you're okay. And I want to show your documents too. So step 3 is to wring the most out of each record. So I think you're echoing Jim and Michael was a little premature, right? Now you're supposed to echo them because that's kind of what not just the main name is. It's really kind of taking that record and going beyond what you're looking for, specifically what you think you're looking for. So what other kind of wringing do you do when it comes to your different records?
So I think it's super important, again, especially as you're first starting out in a particular, new area that you need to learn about. I can't stress enough getting to the point where you understand why the records were created. What were the laws regarding the record? When you're looking at the record, now we're talking about reliability of different pieces of information. Who was the informant? How likely were they to know whether the information they're providing is accurate or not? Those kind of backstories, specifically the law. And I'll talk about that when we get into some of the examples. Understanding the law and how a record was created and what it's actually telling you versus what it would seem like if you didn't know that is super important.
Yes, that is so. The law, like we don't even think, we just see this record in this microcosm. Like you just see your name on that record and you're just happy, but you're saying, why in the heck was this record even created? You got to go back to that and understanding the law, which I normally don't think about when I'm looking at records. So I love your ringing ideas.
Well, so I mean, and lastly, I think we all start out this way where you're reading what the document says, but look for clues in the document that may not be, obviously they're all written because you're looking at a written document, but patterns and anomalies in different records are particularly important to take note of. And we'll take a look at that in some of our examples. So speaking of examples, we're ready for the first one.
Yes, here we go. Example number 1. You got a lot too. We want to make sure we get them all in.
So we'll go through
I think
quick.
it's already showing.
I've never been accused of talking too slowly.
Oops, it came and it went. Here we go.
So
forgive me.
That's okay. So this first thing we're looking at here, this is an Orphans Court case file. So it's an original document, 1796. So my research question that some of these examples look at are trying to identify the father of my 5th great grandfather, Elijah States. This is the account of Jacob States, who turns out to be Elijah's uncle, but for his guardianship of Samuel States, who's a minor son of John States. So there's a lot there already in the first line. So John States, we know from this record, when we get down into this crazy math here, again, understanding the law. So before 1794, I believe is the year, both in Pennsylvania and in Delaware, the eldest son received 2 shares of the estate. So when you get to this crazy math, and nobody told me there was math involved in this stuff, being 1/5 of 2/8 subject to a deduction of 1/3 during the life of Sarah the widow. That's a mouthful. So you have to figure out what all that is. So the 1/3 is pretty easy. That's dower, right? The wife's dower claim. The 1/5 is Samuel's part of John's estate. And John's estate, this is telling us he received 2 shares of the estate of Jacob States. So from this document of the grandson, we know that John States was the eldest son of the grandfather.
Ah, gotcha.
But if you didn't know the law that told you that there were a double share, you'd be looking for another kid, but didn't exist.
Yes.
And you also wouldn't know who the oldest son was. But this also, the best thing about this is one of my favorite documents. I have those too. I'm sure you do too. If you look down at the bottom of that document, there's an accounting for what they've paid the widow who lived until February 7th, 1790.
Oh, I saw that. Let me show everyone.
So here in the guardianship of a grandson, you get the 1790 death date of the grandmother.
Oh, yeah.
So again, expanding that scope of who you're researching, not just the main name as it was referred to earlier.
Yeah, I'm gonna hear that in my sleep, not just the main name. It sounds like a rap.
You started
that. All right, is your next? Do you have another document for ringing?
Yep, next one coming up.
All right. Oh, we got a lot of circles and stuff here. Let's see. What's this document that we're looking at?
This is the documents. So this is an example of reading below the surface. So Elijah had probably 8 or 9 deeds that he executed during his lifetime. The examples that are circled here, these are from 3 different states. Not all 5 counties are represented, but in every case, the county clerk in different states and different counties and different times all indicated by the fact that they didn't note that he'd made a mark that Elijah had signed each of those deeds. So his signature was on those documents. The documents in the box, and again, we're establishing a pattern. The documents in the box, the 1798 is a receipt that I had for a long time, and I wasn't sure whether it was my Elijah States or not. This is from Marietta, Ohio. The 1818 piece there is his signature on, and Michael will like this one, an Ohio tract entry book. And as I started looking through it, I realized that they were actually contained original signatures. So I was able to compare the signatures from 1818 and 1798. So not only did I, was I able to figure out that Elijah signed his documents, but I actually have 2 copies of his actual signature. So looking beyond what the record actually says, for more patterns that can help you establish, an identity for your person.
Nice. I love that. Signatures are so important, especially during this time period, because you don't have pictures. So it's almost like the most personal thing that you can find about that individual. So it's really nice.
Well, I was really ecstatic to discover that 1798 document actually was a signature, because I got to hold that.
Here's another one. You do a lot of ringing, don't you? Here's another one that you rung out. Tell us what this document is and what you're ringing out.
So this is another deed purportedly executed by Elijah, but you'll notice in this case, the pattern's different, right? It's not signed, even though we've kind of established from all these other deeds that Elijah signed all of his, every other one, except there are 2 deeds that he didn't sign. And going back to the point about not just looking at the main names, you see circled there is Elisha States, who ends up being Elijah's first cousin.
Oh.
And for a long time, we'll talk about disproving theories in the next step, but for a long time, I had trouble disproving one of the potential theories of a candidate for the father for Elijah. The answer actually came from Elisha. In the box, there's some examples of handwriting from original probate records. And Elisha was the executor for Andrew Tuffery's account or estate. And so there's a lot of writing there. And there's a petition, which I'll talk about in the next step, in which they're petitioning for partition to sell land belonging to both grandfathers of Elijah, in which there are some original handwriting. And when you line it up, the handwriting exactly matches Elisha's states. So it actually wasn't Elijah appearing in court or signing these documents, or not signing them, as the case may be. But it was, in fact, his cousin Elisha.
Elisha, I love that.
Because the names aren't confusing enough, you have to make them as close to each other as you possibly can.
Yes, that makes sense. So that was step 3, which is ring. Did you have more ringing?
No, I think.
Okay, that's no more ringing.
No more ringing.
So that was step 3, I believe, with the ringing. Yes, so we're ringing out each record, and I love how yours kind of segues with Michael's and Jim with the going beyond the main name.
Yeah,
and so
I'll
step
give
4
Jim credit for that idea, because it worked out well.
Step 4 is to assemble evidence into a theory and disprove it. What are you talking about? So explain this to me, please.
Okay, well, I'm sure that I'm not the only one out there who, when we first started out, decided that we had a candidate for the father or whatever, the problem was we were trying to solve. And we jumped through all kinds of hoops to try and prove that to be correct, rather than, assembling a theory and then figuring out if you can poke a hole in it. Because to me, if you can disprove every theory but one, you're doing pretty well with as far as getting your proof argument together. And I think a part of that, and when we get to the documents in this section, there's some examples of this. I think we all start out kind of document based, where we read a document that says something. So we're kind of like, okay, well, this says that Elijah's father is Jacob. So like that, it says right here in this deed, it must be right. But
everything's right.
It takes time to evolve to a point where you're comfortable looking at all the evidence and letting the evidence tell the story, rather than trying to prove this document right or that document right, or which is better, which is only when you look at all the evidence do you stand a shot at adequately resolving the conflicts. Because if you research more than 5 minutes, you've found conflicts. So. And the other piece of this is if there are conflicts you can't resolve, that's okay. I mean, to me, a incomplete answer is better than a wrong answer. So I think, especially as you're starting out, you want to answer the question. If you find a piece of document that tells you an answer, then you kind of want to go with that answer because you don't want to not have an answer.
So you don't have to settle on the answer before you go to bed. Like you can go to bed without knowing all the answers.
And there's shades too, right? It doesn't have to be like this is absolutely the truth. It can be you can qualify things. It's the evidence tends to imply that most certainly, probably, likely, all those qualifiers that you can throw in when you start to assemble stuff in step 5.
So let's look at, it looks like you have some disprove the theory documents for us.
Yep.
So what is this one about Elijah?
So this is an 1800 deed in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. Elijah Staat's selling interest, and according to the deed, that came to him by the death of his father, Jacob Staat Sr., and also his share of land coming to him by the death of his sister's son, Jacob Irons. So there's quite a bit of information in this document. By the way, not the main name, John Callahan turns out to be Elijah's uncle by marriage. And eventually ends up in Ohio as well. And it was a big piece of the state's mystery puzzle was through him. But so there's other deeds of other descendants of Jacob Staat Sr., and they describe in math what this deed describes in words. But it all kind of comes down to each of them selling a full share of Jacob Staat Sr.'s estate. So again, because it says right in this deed that Elijah is supposedly saying that he got the land from his father, Jacob Staat Sr., most states researchers, and there's probably about 6 of us, but have latched on to Jacob Staat Sr. as the father. And so one of the major things that I had to do once I started seeing what the evidence was actually pointing to was now I have to disprove, I have to show how this is not likely correct. There's a very weird scenario, which it could be, but common sense will tell you that Jacob Staat isn't the father. And again, it's on you as the researcher to make that argument and assemble that evidence. But yeah, you got to do it.
Got to do it if you want to feel secure in because a lot of people feel uneasy about what they're doing sometimes, and it kind of can take out the fun of it.
Yeah.
Well, so tell us about this one.
Yeah.
What was the
sometimes you look at it and you go, this doesn't agree, but I don't know what to do with it, so I'm going to move on from it for now, rather than addressing it in some way, which you really need to do because someone else who finds that will ask the question. So speaking of that, this is a more obscure document for Elijah Staats. This is in a docket book of Orphan Court's records. This is a petition for partition, in which it says Elijah Staats of Appoquinimink 100. Appoquinimink is one of my favorite words. I have favorite words too. And he's talking about land that descended from Elijah's maternal grandfather. And it talks about how the 4 children were left. Sarah, who all records agree is Elijah's mother. This record says that she intermarried with David Staats, the petitioner's father, and Sarah's since dead and has no other issue living than the petitioner. This turns out to be wrong also, and was a little more difficult to disprove because it didn't make a lot of sense. But in the end, it came down to those signatures and discovering that all these, there was another deed in the sequence, one in 1808, one in 1809, selling 2 pieces of land that would belong to as Elijah, that turned out to be Elisha actually the one in the transaction. And again, that was a little difficult to prove and well beyond the scope of today to talk about how that was all done. But it basically comes down to evaluating all of the evidence, putting it together, seeing what it says. And I like to use, so we're kind of segueing into step 5, I guess, with that. I like to use.
Yeah, so what's step 5? Step 5 is to summarize and publish. I love the idea of summarizing and publishing because we do a lot of freaking work on this stuff.
Yep.
And then we forget. We see it again like 5 years later and like, oh, I wonder if this could be the so-and-so. So This is so key. Tell us about how you do it, and so that you can see it the next time you have the same inkling. How do you
Right.
stay on top of all of this?
So I get published in this sense is kind of a loose term. But if we dutifully go through and do all this research, we find the documents that we can find, we put everything together, in our head or, however we do it. And all we leave behind is a database with citations. Nobody wants that database with citations. Well, I should say not nobody, but fairly few people want a database. You don't go down Christmas morning excited to open your brand new database. But people do like stories, and being able to read about ancestors is a pretty cool thing. And honestly, it documents what, to me, is the most important thing that we do as researchers. Isn't digging up documents, it's what we do with the information that they contain and how we put them together, and the logic that we use to assemble, an argument for a conclusion. And if we don't document that piece, then all that's going to be lost, and someone else is going to, recreate the wheel.
Yes, and redo all the work that you just did.
Yep.
So let's see, summarize and publish, and then
So if you jump to the example here.
Go ahead.
So,
oh yeah. You want me to bring up, let me bring up I like how you kind of just put this out in like sentences, like basic.
Yep. Oh, yours looks different than mine.
It's the same. I just categorized
it. Okay. Because I've got this in small screen. I can't really see it. So that's why I look off to the side when you bring the examples up, because I got them pulled up large over here because I'm blind and getting older now. So basically, this outlines the arguments for the parentage of Elijah, or the father of Elijah's states. So there's lots of different things, and I won't read through them all to bore you from the slide. But you can see that the overarching argument, or the question to be resolved, is who the father is. But every one of these is really a sub-argument that you have to present all the evidence for. So there's lots of evidence that agrees that he was born sometime between 1760 and 1765, but they don't tell you an exact year. So all these different pieces, I have to explain all of these individual pieces in order to get to the very strange conclusion. And I've given this as a presentation several times. Most people nod their head and kind of are in agreement. Some people don't, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay to people to not necessarily agree, because it tells you that, even if you're convinced that you've come to the correct conclusion, you're not presenting it in a way that's convincing everybody. So I think that feedback's good.
And I
but
think this is perfect.
Elijah is the sole remaining heir of a son of Jacob states, a son who's never named in any record anywhere. So that's the nuts and bolts. So I have a bad draft of this. I'll be honest. I'm guilty of not following my own advice completely, but I do at least have a bad draft of it.
No, it might not be elegant, but it fits the need. It shows it's an artifact of the time that you spent, right? The time you spent. So, Chris, I loved your scarce quick start. Let's go through these steps again. For what to do when records are scarce. You want to survey the sources before you search. Get the lay of the land. What's available? Step 2, you want to access what you can and plan for what you can't. Yes, you can leave the house and go to places and see more records sometimes, especially if it's a Family Search affiliate library. Step 3, wring the most out of each record that you have, because you have stuff. Look at it. Step 4, assemble evidence into a theory and disprove it. I love that. Make sure you have an airtight case. Step 5 is to summarize and to publish. Chris, thank you so much for that. We have seconds.
Yeah, I was worried about that 20-minute barrier there,
so that we can all say thank you so much for joining us. And Chris, we appreciate you as our special guest today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Don't go anywhere, Chris.